Hello YouTube, Z-Manzilla here, and as you can see I am in a mostly blank grid room with just a couple of buildings off there in the distance. Now if you look at, first off, obviously, here I am, badass armor, right over here. You'll notice though that it is kind of dark over in this corner, huh? Look at the way that the light plays off of Sir Shotham here, my shotgun and trusty sidekick, who doesn't get as much credit as Corey, who's actually kind of a jerk. But anyway, you know, you can see that my gun, the way that my gun reacts to the light in here. Now, what is so special about this, you may ask? Why are you wasting my time with this? Well, you see, I was asked some questions on YouTube about the way lighting is handled in SNAPMAPs. And so, I wanted to try and answer some of those questions. So what we're going to start with is look at like the way the grid room lighting works. If you look, there's sort of like a spot up there, and you can see it reflected off of the walls. What's going on is there is what I call the source of natural light in the grid room. I just always thought of it as the source of natural light. There's one spot way up there that is super, super bright. It hangs probably just about 100 units or so off of the top of the grid room, and it is this big piece of light that sort of affects everything. So now if you look at the way the shadows, for example, are cast off of these buildings, you see that the direction is based on where the natural light in the grid room is located. So now, the thing is that light, of course, as it is natural light, can be blocked. And so it's one of the problems a lot of folks who are building maps run into is when they're doing custom geo and they try to do interior lighting and it just doesn't work out, and they're trying to figure out why that is. So today we're going to be looking at some of the ways that light happens in the grid room. So anyway, like I said, your light source it's invisible, it's way up there. I have experimented and found out that you can actually push a blocking volume up there and basically block all the natural light in the grid room to do some cool stuff. But the point is, how does that affect stuff on the inside? So what I've done is these buildings, all three of them, have slightly different properties that I'm going to use to play with light. So let's start with this first room here. Okay, what I've done is it's made completely of modern texture, and in this case, it's made of the scalable textures. I can't remember the name off the top of my head anyway. But anyway, so you'll notice the way that light comes through here. You get some pretty cool shadow play because we're at an offset angle from where the natural light is. Okay, so there is some light coming in here. You can kind of see the effects of the metal and stuff, but notice all the places where light doesn't hit. You can't see basically anything. You can see a seam here because of the way if you look on the outside of the building here, you'll notice that they're actually just sort of pieced together like this. If those blocks were interlocking, you would not even see those seams of light. But you see these tiny little seams of light that can kind of come through. But everything else, completely black. Look at the gun. Even my gun, all it does is shine. There's no color in the gun whatsoever. So, so that's the way light works. Now, I've set up a pedestal here. We're going to go ahead and gen a monster and see what the monster looks like in this darkness. Like, I mean, look at that. Look at look how, but the other thing you got to keep in mind is, yeah, I mean, you're going to see just bare silhouettes and stuff. But this does some really cool things, but again, it has all to do with how light works, because that light you're seeing is the natural light that's passing through, and it's always going to work on a light and shadow principle based on that. So, thank you. Now, we're going to move on to a second room where I have blocked that natural light completely. Now, you'll notice the only thing that's visible is my one seam that I set up earlier. So nothing else is visible. If we spawn up a monster in here, like, the light from the spawn is all you get, basically, and that little tiny light. Like, this is an invisible monster, basically, at this point. All natural light, completely black. You can even see all you're getting is just sort of the barest reflections of the gun from the light generating from the sign. So, anyway, yeah, no light whatsoever. So if you want to put light inside one of these type of environments, you have to provide your own, because you're not getting any natural light. Now, a third example is the classic textures. Now, the classic textures don't need any sort of light to show. They operate on their own sort of light logic, like the old classic things. So, but look at my gun. My gun is, like, all it's doing is, like, barely reflecting what's on the walls and stuff. Other than that, I'm completely dark. Like, look at this. I am a shadow person. No natural light is hitting me. And that same goes for this prop here. This prop is from the real world. Look at what's going on here. No natural light hitting it. The only stuff that illuminates is the stuff that's designed to illuminate. And that's how light works in these things. It turns everything into doggone shadows, but you can still see everything clearly because the classic textures are not affected by light the same way that these textures are. And you can see, now another interesting thing, if I were to spawn a monster in this room, look at this. That monster is a shadow person. Like, check that out. No natural light whatsoever hitting this monster. Now, imagine that. Yeah, imagine using classic, just entirely classic textures in a modern grid room. You know, using the grid room's rules for light, you'd make shadow creatures. So that's how that works. Now, on that note, and now that we know that the way classic textures and modern textures respond differently to natural light, let's see what happens when we go into a classic grid room. Now, the classic grid room does not have the same rules for light as the modern grid room. Remember I said there's that single point of natural light and everything's sort of based off of that, and if you block that light, everything's shadowy? No, we don't have that here. This entire grid room uses light the way classic textures do. So we'll start off with, we're in the classic room. Let's go into the classic textures room. As expected, nothing's happened. Now look at my gun. Look at the gun is no different whether I'm inside or outside. So there's no variation in the color whatsoever. If we spawn a monster, they are clearly visible. They are not a shadow person. They're just all, you know, all their light is right there. You can see them 100%. Now, what happens if we go into the modern textured areas that are using classic light rooms? Now remember, this one completely blocks all light. You know, there's virtually no light that can come in here, and yet our prop looks well lit. Our monsters completely well lit. You know, we don't have to worry about lighting. You know? In fact, you know, like they, aside from like some just, you know, muzzle flash and stuff, that there's really no indication. And as obviously this is going to respond the same way, this room, because, you know, that's what goes on. So the question I was specifically asked about was, you know, how do you get light in a custom geo build? And so there's two answers to that. You know, the first is you can set up a bunch of lights and all that other stuff. The second is if you simply don't want to deal with lighting, do all your building in classical grid rooms, because they do light differently. And so you can use that principle to like just sort of say, okay, I want to do a complicated custom geo build using modern day, you know, all your modern day stuff here, these textures, and go ahead, go nuts with it. You'll never have to worry about lighting as long as you build it in a classical area. You know, like one of these, or one of the classic grid rooms instead of the modern grid room, because, you know, different lighting. So those are all things to think about. If you have any other questions related to this or anything else that has to do with lighting, like for example, if you're trying to figure out ways to, you know, get lighting in, like one thing you can do, by the way, let's go back to the modern day grid room, because there's another question I was asked, and I'll just answer that one real quickly, which is, what are some ways that you can, you know, get light to work in a modern grid room without revealing your grid, you know, that you're in a grid room. You know, how do you cover this up? So the answer to that, let's head back to the editor for this one, is that there are certain modern materials that light actually does pass through. And actually, when I say certain, I mean one, skybox. So if you okay, so let's say, for example, you got Floop. Let's take this, put you over here-ish. Alright, and you know, just lower you halfway, whatever. Okay, and now we're going to take this and we're going to make it into a skybox. Now it's very important that we use the an actual skybox, because there's two kinds of skybox. There's sky, and then there's sky plus glass. For some reason, sky plus glass does not let natural light through, but sky does. And so if we go to our player and we'll see how that affects the light. But from my experience, what's about to happen here is that the natural light will pass through the skybox and into the room just as if there was nothing there. So you can use skybox to your advantage. And then again, there's that. See, here's what's weird. So glass obviously has the same light passing principle. So here, I'll show you. So yeah, see, we still get our working slats. We still get the cool shadow play and stuff. It all works exactly the same way as it did before. It's just now you can't see the grid room. So that's sort of the way to let natural light into a custom geo build without revealing your grid. You just got to use Skybox. Now, you may want to say, oh, well, gee, I don't know. I don't want all these things looking to visible to the sky. That's just weird for my map. Okay, fair enough. The problem is if you use sky plus glass, then what happens is it doesn't let light pass through. It is the weirdest logic because skybox lets the light pass through. Glass lets the light pass through. Skybox plus glass does not let the light pass through. It is really sort of weird. But anyway, the way you get around that is all you got to do is Duke, and then we'll head down here. Oh, yeah, you are going to need to go up just a skosh, buddy. And then we change this to one of the Doom texture glasses, and for just make it like one of the super thick ones, like the Frosted Wire Grid Dirty is a great example. So what I've done is, for this effect here, we've taken I want to say that's what the classic hell, yeah, classic hell skybox. And then put another layer over it of the Frosted Wire Grid Dirty. Okay, and now let's go ahead and look at that in the player and see what happens. Loading it up. Okay, so this is the area we did over here. Exact same light passage, only now we've concealed that we're using a skybox. So what's happening is the skybox is covering the grid room, and then the glass is covering the skybox. So what you end up with is just a really what looks like a cool light. Now, if you wanted to like really get more intricate with your geo, make thinner slats, whatever you want to do, you could totally get away with it, because just got to remember that that's what's making your light pass through. Now, another thing you could do, for example, is maybe have like an open, just have like make the whole ceiling this, or make it like a square opening, or whatever you want to do, and just experiment with the way light hits in here. But that's basically the way you get natural grid room light into a custom geo build. Is you basically have to find a way to combine skybox with a skybox blocking volume with a glass blocking volume as your roof. So make that one of your roof elements somehow. So anyway, if you have any other questions about this or any other things that have to do with lighting in the two grid rooms, by all means, feel free to go ahead and ask those in the comments, and be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already. Thanks for watching.